My name is Margaret. I'm 32 years old, and I never thought I'd be sitting in a courtroom watching my own brother try to destroy me. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Bruce sat across the aisle with his lawyer, his cold eyes fixed on me like I was some stranger who'd stolen from him. But here's the thing, he didn't know there was a secret our father had kept hidden for 20 years, something that would change everything. As I clutched the manila folder in my lap, I could feel my hands trembling because I knew this wasn't just about money anymore. Before I tell you how this courtroom drama unfolded, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and please hit that like button if you've ever felt betrayed by family. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this story ends, because what happened next shocked everyone in that room. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when our family was whole and happy. Growing up in our small house on Maple Street in Cincinnati, Ohio, Bruce and I had what most people would call a perfect childhood. Our father Robert was a master carpenter who could build anything with his hands, from kitchen cabinets to entire staircases. The smell of sawdust and wood stain filled our garage every evening as he worked on his projects. Our mother Helen taught third grade at Lincoln Elementary, and she had this way of making every day feel special with her homemade cookies and bedtime stories. Bruce was 3 years older than me, and from the very beginning he seemed to resent the attention I got from our parents. While I would spend hours in the garage with Dad learning how to sand wood and measure twice before cutting once, Bruce preferred staying inside playing video games or watching television. Dad would always invite him to join us, saying things like, "Come on, son, let me show you how to use this router." But Bruce would just roll his eyes and walk away. As we got older, the differences between us became more obvious. I genuinely loved spending time with our parents, helping Mom grade papers and learning Dad's carpentry techniques. Bruce, on the other hand, seemed to view our family time as an obligation. He'd sit through dinner checking his phone, barely contributing to conversations about school or Dad's latest woodworking project. When I graduated high school, Dad helped me set up a small workshop in the basement where I could practice my skills. He'd bought me my own set of tools for my 18th birthday, each one engraved with my initials. "These tools will serve you well, Maggie," he said, using the nickname only he was allowed to call me. "Take care of them, and they'll take care of you." Bruce had received a car for his 18th birthday, which he promptly crashed 3 months later. The first real crack in our family appeared when Mom got sick. I was 28 when Helen was diagnosed with breast cancer. The doctors said they'd caught it early, but the treatments were aggressive and exhausting. I immediately moved back home to help with her care, taking a leave of absence from my job at the local furniture company where I'd been working as a designer. Bruce, who was living in an apartment across town with his girlfriend at the time, rarely visited. When he did show up, it was usually to ask Dad for money or to complain about how the medical bills were affecting the family finances. I remember one particular evening when Mom was having a really bad day after chemotherapy. She couldn't keep any food down, and Dad was beside himself with worry. Bruce walked in, took one look at the situation, and said, "This is too depressing. I'll come back when she's feeling better." That night after Bruce left, I found Dad crying in the garage. He was holding a piece of oak he'd been shaping into a jewelry box for Mom, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I don't understand that boy," he whispered. "How can he turn his back on his own mother when she needs us most?" Mom fought bravely for 2 years, but the cancer eventually won. The funeral was devastating, but what hurt almost as much was watching Bruce treat it like a social event. He spent most of the time networking with distant relatives and family friends, talking about his job selling insurance and how well he was doing financially. When people tried to share memories of Helen, Bruce would quickly change the subject to himself. After Mom's death, Dad aged rapidly. The house felt empty without Helen's laughter and warmth, and Robert seemed to lose his passion for woodworking. His arthritis got worse, making it difficult for him to hold his tools properly. I started visiting every day after work, cooking dinner and making sure he was taking his medications. Bruce continued his pattern of sporadic visits, usually coinciding with times when he needed money. 3 years after Mom's funeral, Dad's health took a serious turn for the worse. His doctor diagnosed him with congestive heart failure and gave him maybe 6 months to live. Without hesitation, I quit my job and moved back into my childhood bedroom to care for him full-time. The decision felt natural and right, even though it meant giving up my career and my independence. Those final months with Dad were both heartbreaking and precious. We spent hours talking about Mom, about his childhood, and about his hopes for Bruce and me. He taught me the most advanced woodworking techniques he knew, insisting that someone in the family should carry on the tradition. "Your hands have the same steady touch as your mother's," he'd say, watching me work on a complicated dovetail joint. "She would be so proud of the woman you've become." Bruce visited maybe once every 2 weeks during this period, and his visits were always brief and uncomfortable. He'd stand in the doorway of Dad's bedroom, make small talk for 10 minutes about the weather or his sales numbers, then find an excuse to leave. Dad never said anything critical about Bruce in front of me, but I could see the disappointment in his eyes every time his son walked away. On what turned out to be Dad's last day, he was surprisingly alert and talkative. We spent the morning looking through old photo albums, laughing at pictures of Bruce and me as children. Around noon, he asked me to help him out to the garage one last time. Using his walker, he shuffled over to his main workbench and pointed to a corner where several pieces of furniture sat covered with dusty tarps. "Maggie," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I want you to know that everything I built, everything I learned, I'm passing on to you. You're the only one who truly understands what this craft means." He squeezed my hand with surprising strength. "Check the wooden box in the attic when the time comes, sweetheart. There's something important I need you to find." That evening, Dad passed away peacefully in his sleep. I was holding his hand when he took his last breath, and I felt a strange sense of peace knowing that he hadn't died alone. Bruce arrived at the house 2 hours later after I'd already called the funeral home and made the initial arrangements. His first question wasn't about how Dad had died or whether he'd suffered. Instead, he asked, "Did he say anything about his will?" The funeral was a blur of condolences and casseroles. Bruce played the part of the grieving son perfectly in public, accepting sympathy and telling stories about Dad's woodworking skills. But privately, he was already focused on practical matters. The day after we buried our father, he showed up at the house with a notebook and started making lists of Dad's possessions. "We need to get this place appraised," he said, walking through the rooms like he was touring a potential purchase. "The real estate market is hot right now, and this lot is worth good money because of the location." When I suggested we might want to keep some of Dad's tools and furniture for sentimental reasons, Bruce scoffed. "Sentiment doesn't pay bills, Maggie. We need to be practical about this." A week later, we met with Dad's lawyer, an elderly man named George Patterson, who had handled our family's legal affairs for decades. The reading of the will was straightforward and exactly what we'd expected. Dad had left his estate to be divided equally between Bruce and me. The house, his savings account, his tools, and his collection of handcrafted furniture would all be split 50-50. Bruce seemed satisfied with this arrangement, nodding approvingly as Mr. Patterson read through the document. I was fine with it too, honestly. I didn't need everything, I just wanted to honor Dad's memory and preserve some of his craftsmanship. We shook hands in the lawyer's office, and Bruce actually seemed pleasant for the first time in years. But something nagged at me as we left the building. Dad's final words kept echoing in my mind, "Check the wooden box in the attic." That evening, I climbed up into the dusty attic space above the garage. Behind stacks of Christmas decorations and old sporting equipment, I found a handcrafted wooden box I'd never seen before. It was beautiful, made from cherry wood with intricate dovetail joints that showed Dad's master-level skill. Inside the box, I discovered a collection of items that didn't make immediate sense. There were several letters in Dad's handwriting, some old photographs of our family, and a small brass key attached to a tag that read, "First National Bank Box 247. The letters were addressed to me personally, and as I read them by the dim attic light, I began to understand that our father had been planning something for a very long time. For 6 months after Dad's funeral, Bruce and I worked together relatively peacefully to settle the estate. We hired an appraiser who valued the house at $230,000, which was more than either of us had expected. Dad's savings account contained $47,000, and his collection of handcrafted furniture was appraised at an additional $15,000. The plan was to sell everything and split the proceeds, giving us each about $150,000. I was in the process of cleaning out Dad's workshop when Bruce showed up unexpectedly one Tuesday morning in March. He wasn't alone. A man in an expensive suit accompanied him, carrying a leather briefcase and wearing the kind of confident smile that made my skin crawl. Bruce introduced him as Dennis Hartwell, his attorney. "Maggie, we need to talk." Bruce said, his tone completely different from the cooperative attitude he'd maintained for months. "I've been thinking about Dad's will, and I don't think it's fair." He gestured around the workshop, which I'd been carefully organizing and preparing for sale. "I'm the oldest son. In most families, the oldest child inherits the family business and property. That's the traditional way." Dennis stepped forward, extending his hand in a gesture that felt more like a threat than a greeting. "Ms. Margaret, I've been reviewing your father's will with Bruce, and we believe there are grounds to contest the current arrangement. Your brother has a stronger legal claim to this estate based on primogeniture principles and his status as the eldest male heir." I stared at them both, feeling like I'd been slapped. Primogeniture. This isn't medieval England, and Dad wasn't a king. He made his wishes very clear in his will. I set down the handplane I'd been holding and faced them directly. "Besides Bruce, you barely visited Dad in his final years. I'm the one who took care of him, who gave up my job and my life to make sure he wasn't alone." Bruce's face hardened, and I saw a side of my brother I'd never seen before. "That was your choice, Maggie. Nobody asked you to play the martyr. Dad was getting old and sentimental. He probably felt guilty about you sacrificing your career, so he made an emotional decision instead of a logical one." He walked over to Dad's main workbench and ran his hand along the smooth surface. "But the reality is, I'm his son, his heir. This house, this property, it should all come to me." Dennis opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "We're prepared to file a formal challenge to the will in probate court. These cases can be expensive and time-consuming, Ms. Margaret. It would be much simpler if you agreed to a more equitable distribution now. Bruce is willing to offer you $25,000 for your share of the estate." $25,000. Out of $300,000. I felt my anger rising, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Get out," I said quietly. "Both of you. Get out of my father's house right now." Bruce stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought he might try to intimidate me physically. "Don't be stupid about this, Maggie. $25,000 is a generous offer considering you have no legal training and no money to fight us in court. Take the deal." I said, "Get out." I raised my voice, pointing toward the door. "And don't come back here without calling first. This is still legally my home, too, until the estate is settled." After they left, I sat alone in Dad's workshop, surrounded by the tools and projects that represented his life's work. I couldn't understand how Bruce had become so greedy and cruel. The brother I'd grown up with had been selfish and self-centered, but this felt like something else entirely. This felt like pure greed. That evening I started doing research on inheritance law and probate court procedures. What I discovered wasn't encouraging. Bruce was right about one thing: fighting a will contest would be expensive and time-consuming. Even though Dad's original will was clearly legal and properly executed, defending it in court could cost tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. But as I read through various legal websites and case studies, I kept thinking about the brass key hidden in Dad's wooden box. I'd been carrying it in my purse for months, uncertain what to do with it. First National Bank was downtown, about 15 minutes from Dad's house. The next morning, I decided it was time to find out what Dad had been hiding. The safety deposit box area at First National Bank was located in the basement behind two sets of locked doors and a security guard who checked my identification 3 times. When I presented the key and showed them Dad's death certificate, the bank manager, a professional woman named Patricia Chen, personally escorted me to box 247. Your father rented this box 22 years ago, Ms. Chen explained as we walked down a corridor lined with small metal doors. He paid the rental fees annually, always in cash, always on time. I remember him because he was one of our most reliable customers. She used her master key along with Dad's key to open the narrow metal drawer. I'll give you privacy to examine the contents. Take all the time you need. Inside the safety deposit box, I found documents that made my hands shake as I read them. There was a second will dated just 6 months before Dad's death, properly notarized and witnessed by 2 bank employees. This will was completely different from the one we'd heard read in Mr. Patterson's office. According to this document, Dad left his entire estate to me with only a $5,000 bequest to Bruce. But that wasn't all. Along with the will, there was a sealed envelope containing a letter addressed to me and a DVD labeled, "For Margaret Only." The letter, written in Dad's careful handwriting, explained everything. My dearest Maggie, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the key I left for you. I want you to know that this second will represents my true wishes for how my estate should be distributed. The will that Bruce and the lawyers know about is what I call my peacekeeping will. I created it to avoid family conflict while I was alive. But I always intended for you to inherit everything. You are the daughter who stayed by my side when your mother was dying. You are the child who gave up your own life to care for me in my final months. You understood and appreciated the craft I spent my lifetime perfecting. Bruce has shown repeatedly that he values money over family possessions, over people. He comes around only when he needs something, and he has never shown genuine love or respect for our family traditions. I know this will be painful for you, but Bruce has made his choices. He has debts you don't know about, gambling debts to dangerous people. He owes over $60,000 to a loan shark named Tommy Ricci, who operates out of the Riverside Casino. I've been watching Bruce destroy his life with gambling for 3 years, and I refuse to enable his addiction by giving him money he'll only waste. The DVD contains my video testimony explaining these decisions. I recorded it here at the bank with Ms. Chen as a witness. I hope you'll never need to use it, but if Bruce tries to take what's rightfully yours, this evidence will support your case. I sat in that small, windowless room for over an hour, reading Dad's letter 3 times and trying to process what it meant. My father had known about Bruce's gambling problem and had made a deliberate decision to protect his estate from being squandered. The man I'd buried 6 months ago had been planning this revelation from beyond the grave. The DVD player in the bank's customer service area showed me a side of Dad I'd never seen before. Sitting at a table in what appeared to be a conference room, he looked directly into the camera and spoke with the kind of firm resolve I remembered from my childhood when he was teaching me important life lessons. This is Robert Wilson, and today is September 15th, 2022. I am recording this statement to explain my final will and testament. My son Bruce has gambling debts that he believes I don't know about. He owes money to criminals, and he has already tried to steal from my bank accounts twice. I caught him using my debit card last month to withdraw $300 without permission. When I confronted him, he claimed it was a loan, but he has never repaid money he's borrowed from me. My daughter Margaret has sacrificed her career and her personal life to care for me and her mother. She understands the value of hard work and craftsmanship. She respects family and tradition. She deserves to inherit what I've built, because she will honor it and use it wisely. Bruce will gamble it away within a year. The video continued for 20 more minutes with Dad methodically explaining his reasoning and providing specific examples of Bruce's irresponsible behavior. It was heartbreaking to watch, but it was also empowering. My father had trusted me enough to leave me the tools I needed to fight for what was right. By the time I left the bank that day, Bruce had already escalated his legal campaign. I found 3 messages on my phone from Dennis Hartwell, each one more aggressive than the last. The final message was barely professional. Ms. Margaret, you have 24 hours to respond to our settlement offer. After that, we file suit, and you'll be responsible for all court costs when you lose. I called the number Dennis had left and told him I would be hiring my own attorney. His response was exactly what I'd expected. "You're making a huge mistake. You can't win this fight and you're going to end up broke and bitter. Bruce is being generous by offering you anything at all." That evening, I researched probate attorneys in Cincinnati and found Samuel Richardson, a lawyer who specialized in estate disputes and had an excellent reputation for representing clients against frivolous challenges. When I called his office and explained my situation, he agreed to meet with me the next morning. Samuel was everything Dennis wasn't: thoughtful, patient, and genuinely interested in justice, rather than just winning. After reviewing both wills and watching Dad's video testimony, he leaned back in his chair and smiled for the first time since I'd entered his office. "Margaret, you have an incredibly strong case. Your father's second will is absolutely valid, and his video testimony explains his reasoning clearly. The timing works in your favor too, since he created this will recently enough that no one can claim he was suffering from dementia or diminished capacity." Samuel tapped the documents with his pen. "However, I recommend we keep this second will secret until we're in court. The element of surprise will be powerful, and it will prevent Bruce and his attorney from preparing counter-arguments." Over the next 2 months, Dennis filed his formal challenge and began what he clearly thought would be an easy victory. His strategy was to portray Bruce as the responsible older son who deserved the bulk of the inheritance while painting me as a manipulative daughter who had taken advantage of an elderly father's weakness. The discovery process was brutal. Dennis subpoenaed my financial records, my employment history, and even my medical records, looking for anything he could use to discredit me. He interviewed Dad's neighbors, his doctors, and anyone who had known our family, fishing for evidence that I had somehow coerced Dad into favoring me in his will. But Samuel was conducting his own investigation, and what he discovered about Bruce was devastating. My brother owed money to 3 different loan sharks, not just Tommy Ricci. He had defaulted on his car payments, his credit cards were maxed out, and he had been borrowing money from friends and coworkers for months. Most damaging of all, Samuel obtained bank records showing that Bruce had attempted to access Dad's accounts multiple times in the 6 months before his death. "Your brother is desperate," Samuel explained during one of our strategy meetings. "Desperate people make poor decisions, and Dennis is encouraging him to believe he can solve all his problems by taking your inheritance. This makes them dangerous, but it also makes them careless." Samuel was right about the dangerous part. Bruce began showing up at Dad's house at random times, always when he thought I wouldn't be there. Neighbors reported seeing him trying to look through windows and even attempting to jimmy the lock on the back door. When I confronted him about it, he claimed he was just checking on the property's security. The harassment escalated to phone calls at all hours, with Bruce alternating between pleading and threatening. "Just give me half Maggie," he said during one late-night call. "I'm in real trouble here. These people I owe money to, they're not patient. If I don't pay them soon, something bad is going to happen." Other times, his tone was pure menace. "You think you're so smart, but you're going to lose everything. Dennis knows what he's doing, and when this is over, you'll be lucky to get bus fare home." 2 weeks before our court date, Bruce's desperation reached a breaking point. I was at Dad's house packing up the last of his personal belongings when I heard someone breaking down the back door. I called 911 immediately, but Bruce was already inside the house, screaming and throwing furniture around like a madman. "Where is it?" he shouted, overturning Dad's reading chair and dumping out the contents of desk drawers. I know the old man had more money hidden somewhere. He was too cheap to keep everything in the bank. When he saw me standing in the doorway with my phone, he lunged toward me. "Hang up that phone right now, or I swear I'll make you sorry." I'd never been physically afraid of Bruce before, but the man standing in front of me was a stranger. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes were wrinkled and dirty, and he smelled like he hadn't showered in days. This wasn't just greed anymore. This was the desperation of someone who had lost everything and was willing to do anything to get it back. "The police are already on their way," I told him, backing toward the front door. "You need to leave now, Bruce. You're only making things worse for yourself." "Worse?" He laughed. but it was a horrible sound with no humor in it. "It can't get worse, Maggie. Do you have any idea what these people will do to me if I don't pay them? They're not going to just break my legs. They're going to kill me." He grabbed a ceramic lamp and threw it against the wall where it shattered into dozens of pieces. "But that's not going to happen because I'm taking every penny of Dad's money and you can't stop me." The police arrived within minutes, but the damage was done. Bruce had destroyed several pieces of Dad's furniture and had torn through every room in the house looking for hidden cash or valuables. Officer Janet Rodriguez took pictures of the damage and arrested Bruce for breaking and entering destruction of property and threatening behavior. "Has he done anything like this before?" Officer Rodriguez asked me as we watched Bruce being loaded into the back of a patrol car. "Never," I admitted. "He's always been selfish but never violent. I think he's having some kind of breakdown." Dennis bailed Bruce out of jail the next morning, but the arrest had created a new problem for their legal strategy. Samuel immediately filed a motion to include the police report as evidence of Bruce's unstable mental state and his pattern of attempting to steal from Dad's estate. "This arrest is a gift," Samuel told me. "It demonstrates exactly the kind of behavior your father was trying to prevent by changing his will. No judge is going to look at a man who breaks into houses and destroys property and think he deserves to inherit money." But Dennis wasn't giving up. In fact, he seemed to double down on increasingly desperate tactics. He hired a private investigator to follow me, hoping to catch me doing something that could be used against me in court. He contacted Dad's doctors, trying to find evidence that Dad had been suffering from dementia or had been under my undue influence. Most disturbingly, he began reaching out to people from my past, including ex-boyfriends and former co-workers, fishing for anyone who might say something negative about my character. "They're getting desperate," Samuel observed as we reviewed Dennis's latest filings. "When lawyers start grasping at straws like this, it usually means they know their case is weak. But it also means they might try something dramatic in court." Samuel was preparing me for every possible scenario Dennis might attempt. We practiced my testimony dozens of times, going over the timeline of Dad's care, the family dynamics, and my relationship with Bruce. Samuel wanted me to be ready for aggressive cross-examination and personal attacks. "Dennis is going to try to rattle you," he warned. "He'll ask invasive questions about your personal life, your finances, and your motivations. Remember, the jury needs to see you as calm, honest, and genuine. Don't let him provoke you into an emotional response." The weekend before the trial, I visited Dad's grave for the first time since the funeral. The headstone was simple granite with just his name dates and the words, "Beloved husband and father." I sat on the grass next to the marker and told him about everything that had happened, about Bruce's threats and Dennis's tactics, and my fear that I might not be strong enough to honor his wishes. "I hope I'm doing the right thing, Dad," I whispered. "I know you wanted to protect your legacy, but this is tearing what's left of our family apart. If there had been any other way." A gentle breeze rustled the oak tree above his grave, and I chose to interpret it as his approval. The courtroom was packed on the morning of our trial. Judge Patricia Williams, a woman in her 60s with steel gray hair and piercing blue eyes, had a reputation for running an efficient courtroom and having little patience for legal theatrics. Samuel had warned me that she was tough but fair, exactly the kind of judge we wanted for this type of case. Bruce sat at the plaintiff's table with Dennis wearing a new suit that I was sure he couldn't afford. He looked much better than he had during his breakdown at Dad's house, but I could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his hands trembled slightly when he thought no one was looking. Dennis had clearly coached him extensively on courtroom behavior. Dennis's opening statement was a masterclass in emotional manipulation. He painted Bruce as the devoted son who had been tragically excluded from his rightful inheritance by a scheming sister who had isolated their father in his final years. According to Dennis's version of events, I had moved back home not out of love, but as part of a calculated plan to influence Dad's will in my favor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Dennis said, pacing in front of the jury box like a predator, "this case is about family manipulation of the worst kind. Margaret Wilson saw an opportunity when her father became sick and elderly, and she took advantage of that opportunity. She isolated Robert Wilson from his son, filled his head with lies and resentments, and convinced him to change his will to benefit only her. Dennis called several witnesses who testified about Bruce's childhood relationship with Dad, his success in the insurance business, and his apparent devotion to family. Most of these witnesses were distant relatives or family friends who hadn't seen our family dynamics up close, but their testimony created an image of Bruce as a responsible, successful son who deserved his father's inheritance. The most damaging witness was Dr. Elizabeth Harper, Dad's primary care physician in his final months. Under Dennis's questioning, she acknowledged that Dad had been taking pain medications that could potentially affect cognitive function, and that elderly patients were often susceptible to influence from their primary caregivers. In your professional opinion, Dennis asked, would Robert Wilson have been vulnerable to manipulation in his final months? Any elderly patient dealing with pain medication and the stress of declining health could potentially be influenced by someone they depended on for daily care, Dr. Harper replied carefully. Samuel's cross-examination was brilliant. He got Dr. Harper to admit that Dad had never shown any signs of dementia, that his cognitive tests were normal throughout his treatment, and that he had been making complex decisions about his medical care right up until his death. Dr. Harper, did Robert Wilson ever express concerns to you about his daughter Margaret's care or behavior? No, never. In fact, he frequently praised her dedication and spoke about how grateful he was for her sacrifice. And did he ever mention feeling pressured or coerced by anyone regarding his personal affairs? No. If anything, he seemed very much in control of his own decisions. When it was time for Bruce to testify, Dennis had clearly prepared him to present himself as the injured party. Bruce spoke about his childhood memories with Dad, his career achievements, and his shock at being virtually disinherited in favor of his sister. He managed to shed a few tears when describing how hurt he'd been to learn about the will's contents. But Samuel's cross-examination exposed the holes in Bruce's story. Under aggressive questioning, Bruce was forced to admit that he'd rarely visited Dad during his illness, that he'd borrowed money from Dad multiple times without repaying it, and that he'd been arrested for breaking into Dad's house just weeks before the trial. Mr. Wilson, isn't it true that you owe approximately $60,000 to various creditors, including illegal gambling debts? Dennis objected, but Judge Williams allowed the question. Bruce's face turned red as he admitted to having some financial difficulties. And isn't it true that you attempted to access your father's bank accounts without permission on multiple occasions? I was helping him manage his finances, Bruce protested weakly. By using his debit card to withdraw cash for your own use. Bruce couldn't answer that question convincingly, and I could see several jury members exchanging glances. When I testified, Samuel guided me through the story of Dad's final years, emphasizing my sacrifice in caring for him and the close relationship we'd maintained throughout my life. I spoke about Dad's love of woodworking, his pride in teaching me his craft, and his disappointment in Bruce's lack of interest in family traditions. Dennis's cross-examination was brutal, just as Samuel had predicted. He questioned my motives for moving back home, suggested that I had manipulated Dad's medications to keep him dependent on me, and insinuated that I had forged or coerced the will that favored me. Isn't it convenient, Ms. Wilson, that you were the only person present when your father allegedly expressed these negative feelings about your brother? I wasn't the only person who noticed Bruce's behavior, I replied. Ask any of Dad's neighbors, his doctors, or the staff at Mom's hospital. They all saw how rarely Bruce visited and how little he contributed to our parents' care. But you were the one with the most to gain from poisoning your father's mind against his son, weren't you? I felt my anger rising, but I remembered Samuel's coaching. My father didn't need anyone to poison his mind against Bruce. Bruce's actions spoke for themselves. The trial continued for 3 days, with Dennis calling additional witnesses and Samuel systematically dismantling their credibility. But I could see that some jury members were still uncertain. Dennis had done a good job of creating doubt about my motives, and Bruce's performance as the grieving son had been convincing. On the final day of testimony, Samuel stood up and announced that he had one more piece of evidence to present. Your Honor, I would like to introduce into evidence a second will executed by Robert Wilson, along with video testimony explaining his final wishes. The courtroom erupted. Dennis jumped to his feet, shouting objections and demanding to know why this evidence hadn't been disclosed during discovery. Bruce turned white and grabbed Dennis's arm, whispering frantically in his ear. Several jury members leaned forward in their seats, clearly intrigued by this unexpected development. Judge Williams called for order and allowed Samuel to present the second will and Dad's video testimony. As the courtroom watched my father explain his reasoning for changing his will, I saw Bruce collapse into his chair like a deflated balloon. Dad's words were clear, logical, and devastating to Bruce's case. "This is my son, Bruce," Dad said on the video, holding up a photograph. "I love him, but I cannot trust him with money. He has a gambling addiction that he refuses to acknowledge or treat. He has stolen from me, lied to me, and shown complete disregard for his family's well-being. I am leaving him $5,000, which is more than he deserves, but I will not enable his destructive behavior by giving him access to my life savings." Dennis tried to object to the video's admissibility, claiming it was hearsay and that Dad's mental state couldn't be verified. But Judge Williams ruled that the video properly witnessed and notarized at the bank was admissible as a dying declaration. Bruce's breakdown was complete and public. He stood up suddenly, knocking over his chair, and screamed at me across the courtroom. "You manipulative bitch! You turned him against me. Everything was fine until you came back and poisoned him with your lies." Judge Williams ordered the bailiffs to restrain Bruce and held him in contempt of court. As they led him away, still screaming threats and accusations, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief. The brother I'd grown up with was truly gone, replaced by this desperate, angry stranger. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict in my favor. Judge Williams ruled that Dad's second will was valid and that Bruce's challenge was without merit. She also ordered Bruce to pay all court costs and attorney fees, noting that his lawsuit had been frivolous and motivated by greed rather than genuine concern for justice. But the legal victory felt hollow as I watched Bruce being led away in handcuffs for his courtroom outburst. Dennis, realizing his client's behavior had destroyed any chance of appeal, quietly gathered his papers and left without speaking to anyone. Several people came up to congratulate me, but all I could think about was how our family had been destroyed by greed and desperation. 3 months later, I learned that Bruce had been forced to declare bankruptcy. His gambling debts had consumed what little money he had left, and the people he owed had made it clear that his time was up. He sold his apartment and his car, but it wasn't enough. Eventually, he left Cincinnati entirely, and I heard rumors that he'd moved somewhere out west, possibly Las Vegas, though that seemed like the worst possible place for someone with a gambling addiction. I used part of Dad's inheritance to establish the Robert Wilson Woodworking Center in downtown Cincinnati. The center offers free classes to teenagers from low-income families, teaching them traditional woodworking skills and providing them with the tools and mentorship they need to potentially start their own businesses. On the wall of the main workshop, I hung a large photograph of Dad at his workbench, along with a plaque that reads, "In memory of Robert Wilson, who believed that craftsmanship and character go hand in hand." The rest of the inheritance I invested carefully, living modestly in a small apartment near the center. I never remarried Dad's house. Instead, I converted it into a showroom and retail space where the students from the center can display and sell their work. Every piece that sells has a small tag explaining that it was crafted by a young person learning traditional skills, carrying on a legacy of quality and pride in workmanship. Sometimes I think about Bruce and wonder if he ever found peace or if the demons that drove him to destroy our family are still chasing him. I hope he found help for his gambling addiction, but I've learned not to blame myself for his choices. Dad's final gift to me wasn't just money or property. It was the validation that love and loyalty matter more than blood relationships or social expectations. The most important lesson I learned from this painful experience is that family isn't defined by genetics or birth order. Real family consists of people who show up when you need them, who sacrifice for each other's well-being, and who honor the values and traditions that give life meaning. Dad understood this, which is why he made the difficult decision to protect his legacy from someone who would have squandered it. Every day when I unlock the doors to the woodworking center, I can feel Dad's presence in the smell of sawdust and the sound of hand tools shaping raw lumber into something beautiful and useful. The young people who come to learn carry forward not just his technical skills, but his philosophy that honest work and careful craftsmanship are their own rewards. In the end, that legacy is worth far more than any amount of money Bruce could have inherited and lost. I've learned that sometimes protecting the people we love means making hard choices that others might not understand. Dad's decision to hide his true will wasn't about punishing Bruce. It was about refusing to enable destructive behavior and ensuring that his life's work would continue to have meaning. As I watch teenagers master the same dovetail joints and mortise and tenon connections that Dad taught me, I know he would be proud of how his inheritance is being used. The courtroom drama that almost destroyed what was left of our family ultimately revealed the truth about love, responsibility, and the real meaning of inheritance. Money and property are temporary, but the values we pass on to the next generation can last forever. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to protect someone you love from their own destructive behavior? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Please subscribe for more real-life stories about family justice and the complex choices we all face. And if you know someone who's dealing with family inheritance disputes or gambling addiction, please share this video with them. Sometimes knowing you're not alone in these struggles can make all the difference. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that standing up for what's right isn't always easy, but it's always worth it.